Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. As promised, this video will be about the Kurds in the early Islamic times, in the 7th century in fact. Now, just like in the last video, I will primarily focus on accounts and events in which the Kurds are explicitly mentioned. For there are of course many events which transpired in Kurdish inhabited regions in which ethnicity is unfortunately not mentioned. As such, the information learned from this video is good to give you a general impression of the Kurds in this era, but does not at all suffice to tell their full history. There are some academic articles as well as claims on social media which make assertions regarding the Kurds in these early centuries, but they seem to do so by mingling the works of later medieval geographers with historical accounts of events of the early Islamic times, even though the Kurds are not explicitly mentioned in these events. This is not odd, of course. History writing often relies on making assumptions, but in some cases I find these works to be unclear about what is stated and what is assumed. For the sake of this video, as stated earlier, I will not include them here. Additionally, for this video I will skip the southernmost Kurds, mentioned in places like Fars, Khuzestan, Isfahan, Ahvaz, and other places. For even though they are mentioned many times throughout history, it's generally assumed that these were the forebearers of today's Lurs, who, though closely related to the Kurds, are today not considered to be a part of our nation. This exclusion can be deemed controversial since these southernmost Kurds no doubt contributed to shaping the image of the Kurds in the eyes of the others. Additionally, a separate Lur identity, it appears, had not materialized at this point. Therefore, it's important to know that these accounts do exist, and I hope to treat them and the history of the Lurs, as well as their many connections to the Kurds, in the future. Important to note is that the early Islamic authors often use the term Ajam, which in fact means non-Arab, and therefore in many instances no doubt refers to the Kurds. However, unfortunately, this is often simplistically translated to Persian, skewing our perception of history. And lastly, I probably missed out on some accounts. So let's start. In the previous video, I already discussed a couple of 7th century sources, most importantly the geography of Ananias of Shirak and his definition of Korçayk. And I ended with a map of the presence of the Kurds as they had been mentioned in ancient times. This distribution appears to coincide reasonably well with the Kurds' presence in the 1st century of Islam. The first important figure, as mentioned by Asqalani, was Jaban, or as mentioned by Tabari, Jabir al-Kurdi, a Sahabi or companion of Muhammad. He was a tradesman, judging by his name from the town of Sirt. He traveled to Medina, met the Islamic prophet Muhammad, and then converted and returned to his home country. He returned later with, among others, a female companion, bearing a name that by now should sound familiar, Zozan. She also converted after meeting Muhammad. Jaban also had a son called Maimun, also known as Abu Basir. Jaban, moreover, is accredited with some hadiths. Recently a book was released on this individual, but I haven't gotten the opportunity to read it yet. I've also seen a claim that one of the Sassanid commanders called Dailam at the Battle of Qadisiyah bore the epithet al-Kurdi, but I have been unable to confirm this. It was under the Rashiduns that northern Mesopotamia was conquered, and therefore the Kurds first came into contact with the Muslim armies in the 30s of the 7th century AD. Interestingly, Tabari, for the year 634, notes the Kurds as being among the settled farmers of the Sawats, related in the following passage. They all went on to say, when the news had reached the Persians of what Umar had said and deemed fit in respect of the Sawat and the land beyond, they said, we'll be content with the same conditions that the Arabs are content with. Whereas the Kurds of every township were dissatisfied with the damage done to their arable lands. According to Ibn al-Athir, Baladhuri and Ibn Khaldun, Utbe ibn Farkat as-Sulaimi was appointed governor of Mosul by the Caliph Umar in 637. The people of Nineveh resisted him, and he captured the eastern fort. He advanced to the other side of the Tigris, but the people of the western fortress of Mosul agreed to pay jizya. Thereafter, according to Baladhuri, he conquered the forts of al-Marj and all of its villages, the country of Bahusra or Bahudra, Ba'azra or Ba'adra, Hibtun, el-Hanane or Hiane, al-Ma'ale or al-Ma'ala, Damir, and all the castles of the Kurds, advancing as far as Banyasa of Hazar. The transcription varies from one translation to the other. A bit later, Baladhuri relates the conquest of Sharazor, which happened in 643. Sharazor, Asamagan, and Darabat were among the conquests of Utbah ibn Farqat as-Sulaimi. He met the Kurds in combat and killed many of them, and wrote to Umar, "In my conquests I have reached as far as Azerbaijan." Umar appointed him governor over that region, and appointed Harthama ibn Arfaja over al-Mawsul. Ibn al-Athir gives a very similar list, noting al-Merj, Banhezra, Ba'ezra, Hibtun, Dasin, and all the castles of the Kurds. Likewise, Qarda, Bazabda, and all the regions and districts of Mosul fell in the hands of the Muslims. Then on Sharazor, he wrote the following: Umar made Azra ibn Qais the governor of Hulwan, who tried to conquer Sharazor but did not succeed. Therefore Utbah ibn Farqat was sent. After a heavy battle, peace was returned similar to the conditions of Hulwan. The scorpions of this region had greatly hurt the Muslims. On the people of Samihan and Darabas, jizya and kharja taxes were imposed after killing many of the Kurds. He then sent to Umar that he had conquered until Azerbaijan, and he was made governor of that region, and Harsame ibn Arjame governor of Mosul. From this time on, Sharazor and its district were made part of Mosul until the caliphate of Harun al-Rashid. Ibn Khaldun relates this in the following way: Utbah ibn Farqat conquered Mosul and Jabal al-Akrat, meaning the mountains of the Kurds, as well as Sharazur and Damgan. He killed many of the Kurds. Sa'ad sent Huzaifa ibn Yamani to Hulwan, where he fought the Kurds and was tasked to rehabilitate them and secure the roads. The important bit here is that the Kurds already controlled the castles of northern Mesopotamia before the Muslim conquest, which would entail some settled presence and power over the region. Also, Mosul in the early Islamic times clearly designates a rather large area. It was distinguished from Iraq all the way to the south. Not all of these places are known, but some prominent ones are the following. Bahudra most likely refers to Banu Hadra or Duhuk, Ba'adra to Bahadre west of Shekhan, and Sharazor refers to the wider region around today's Khurmal and Halabja. Samagan or Damgan refers to Zimkan. There's a river and a village by that name. Jabal, sometimes Jabal al-Akrat, refers to the Media of old, stretching from the mountains of today's Dakuk and Khanakin regions all the way to Isfahan. Hulwan was a town and region of the Jabal, generally identified with today's Zahal or Sarpoli Zahab. Dasin's location is not exactly known, but probably was in today's Hakkari region or just a bit south of it. And Haza is a village in the Mosul region. Probably in 637, after the Battle of Qadisiyah, Kurtbamdat was captured. It was probably a quarter of Ctesiphon, as mentioned in my previous video. In 642, a commander named Azari Kurt was mentioned on the side of the Sassanids, who was in charge of 10 elephants in Nihavand, which had a total of 30. When he was killed, he was replaced by a commander with 1,000 cavalry under his command. In 643, the Muslim forces advanced even further into the Sassanid Empire. Regarding Sisar, analogous with today's Sanandash, or Sana in Kurdish, Baladhuri relates the following. Sisar was so called because it lay in a depression surrounded by 30 hills, hence its other name, Thalatun Ra'as. It was also called Sisar Satkaniya, which means 30 summits, and 100 springs, because it has as many as 100 springs. Sisar and the adjoining region were pasture lands for the Kurds and others. It also had meadows for the beasts of burden and the cattle of Caliph al-Mahdi. He further adds, when in the caliphate of al-Mahdi the destitute and villain became numerous and spread over al-Jabal, they chose this region for their refuge and stronghold, to which they resorted after acting as highwaymen. According to Ibn Khordadib, the Kurds also overran Masibdan, Ajem and Asaymara in the Marshul Afya. This was sometime in the era of the Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, so in 643 at the latest. These are located in areas today speaking Southern and Laki Kurdish. For the year 643 or 44, Tabari, Ibn al-Athir and Ibn Khaldun also relate a battle between Salama ibn Qais al-Azjai and the Kurds, in which the latter were punished and their women and children kidnapped. However, this probably took place in southern Iran. Around the year 645, the Caliph Uthman sent Salman ibn Rabia Baheli to Aran, and he conquered all of its districts. According to al-Baladhuri, the Kurds of al-Balasajan he summoned to Islam, but they fought against him and were subjugated. Some were made to pay tax and others sadaqah, but the latter were few. A river named after the Kurds is also found in Armenia in this period. Al-Baladhuri refers to the Muslim commander Habib, who in 645 or 6 passed Azdisat, the chief village of al-Hurmuz, then crossed Nar al-Akrat and encamped at Marjdabil, which is historical Dvin. The scholar Minorsky identified this Nar al-Akrat with the Azat river. In the year 651 commenced the conquest of Azerbaijan, and according to Baladhuri, when the Marzuban then made terms with Hudayfa for the people of Azerbaijan for 800,000 dirhams, the conditions being that he should not kill nor enslave any of them, nor raise any fire temples, nor expose them to danger from the Kurds of al-Balasagan, Sablan and Satrudan, nor hinder the people of Ashis in their peculiar custom of dancing on their festal days, nor in their usual observances. Yaqut al-Hamawi notes these places as Palasjan, Silon, and Mianduzan. During the 7th century, a contemporary and rival of Ishayab III, who was the patriarch of the Church of the East from 649 to 659, by name of Kardavaye and Kardoya is mentioned, who had been the head of a monastery himself. Regarding the Kurds during the caliphate of Ali ibn Abi Talib, Baladhuri preserves some passages in his Ansab al-Ashraf. The famed companion of Ali, Malik al-Ashtar, gave his commander Hani ibn Abi the task to guard the roads in the Hulwan valley and to secure the mountains with 1,000 horsemen. In the environment of Dinawar, he came upon the Kurds. They had caused trouble in the region. They got into a conflict, and the greatest part of them were killed. Then Yazid ibn Hajiyeh was appointed governor of Medain. Ali later sent a representative to Ziyad, who had been appointed to collect taxes among the Kurds. Ziyad stated that the Kurds had paid too little, and therefore he forced them to. He also asked not to tell the commander of the faithful. Yet the representative nonetheless told this to Ali. Ali sent Ziyad a letter, telling him, "The representative came to me after having seen you and talked about your practices among the Kurds. This is something I did not want to hear. I swear to you by God that if among the Muslims you embezzle money, I will find you, make you suffer, and take your goods." According to Baladhuri, Ziyad ibn Hafs later asked Ali what he could do for him. Makkal ordered him to get the Kurds to pledge their loyalty to Ali. He assembled them, but the Kurds refused to obey. When Makkal reached Deskere, he heard that the Kurds had attacked Sharazor. He fought them on the mountain, collected them and punished them. When he then returned to Medain, the news of Ali's death reached him. This was in 661. In the year 685, al-Mukhtar gave Sa'ad ibn Hudayfa ibn Yaman authority over Hulwan. He too had 1,000 horsemen under his command. Each month, al-Mukhtar paid him 1,000 dirhams, and he was ordered to fight the Kurds and keep the roads open. He also wrote to his officials in the Jabal region, telling them to send the revenue of the districts under their control to Sa'ad ibn Hudayfa at Hulwan. In the year 694, according to Ibn al-Athir, or in the year 696 or 7 according to al-Tabari, the Kurds of Hulwan are again mentioned, when Suwaid ibn Abdullah Rahman was governor of Hulwan, yet revolted and mustered the townsmen and the Kurds, the latter holding the Hulwan Pass. The Kurds were beaten by Hajjaj ibn Jariyah and Sulaiman ibn Hudayfa, sent by Muttarif. Those were the sources I could find that explicitly mentioned the Kurds in the 7th century. However, there are again quite some legends and folklore on this period. Let's take a look at a few. Controversially, in the Sharafnama, Sharaf Khan claims that a widely circulated story was that of an encounter of a Kurd named Boghdus, who was an envoy sent by the legendary Turkic Oghuz Khan with the Islamic prophet Muhammad, though this story is not found in any other source. The story goes that the man was ugly and stone-hearted, among other things, and that Muhammad became disturbed by his appearance. On asking to what millet or nation he belonged, Boghdus answered that he was Kurdish, whereupon the Prophet Muhammad put a curse of disunity upon the Kurds, saying that God will not allow unity among this people, for if they would unite, they would overcome the world. One of the most popular early Islamic figures among the Kurds is Khalid ibn Walid, a famous commander in the service of the Prophet Muhammad and the Caliphs Abu Bakr and Umar, who did not lose a single battle. There are Kurdish families and tribes which claim to be descended from him, perhaps most notably the Buldan tribe. Two prominent pre-modern literary works derived from folklore, based on early Islamic times in Kurmanji, are Qawli Haspiresh and Qawli Nawala Sisibani. The former is about, believe it or not, a horse of a Christian prince, which was called Haspiresh and Boriqer, and which wanted to be a Muslim. The horse ends up traveling to Medina with the help of Ali. Its authorship is in dispute. The latter is about early Islamic conquests, but its location, Sisibani, is also in dispute, suggested to be either Sisejan in the Caucasus or a place near Nusaybin. Multiple authors wrote copies of the work. Another figure was Yazid ibn Muawiyah, second Umayyad Caliph, generally vilified by Muslims today. Though this is staunchly denied by Yazidis today, medieval historians, perhaps in order to slander them, claimed the Yazidis, who are actually called Ezidi in Kurdish, to have derived their name from this person. Finally, among the folklore of the Shia Zangana tribe, there is apparently the claim that they aided in burying the victims of the Karbala massacre. For the 7th century, we had to rely almost solely on sources written a couple of centuries after the events in question, which is typically so for the early Islamic times. Unfortunately, we do not yet learn of much detail or nuance of Kurdish society in this century. If we focus only on the accounts in which the Kurds are explicitly mentioned, as was the case in this video, then we notice the Kurds being mentioned chiefly as adversaries of the Arab invaders, resisting conversion to Islam. But as the case of the Kurdish Sahabi indicates, there were obviously early conversions as well. Kurds are mentioned in a rather large area. Ignoring the southernmost Kurds, their territory encompassed such regions as Jabal, Sharazor, Mosul, Hulwan, Korchak, even all the way north into Azerbaijan, Balasagan, and Armenia. The latter three, however, still scarcely attested. Interestingly, their dispersion seems to coincide to some extent with the western borders of the Sassanid Empire. They are brought into connection with mountain areas, holding of forts, brigandage and refusal to pay taxes, pastoralism, and once farming and trading. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when I hope to discuss the Kurds in the 8th century.